My name is Dallas Lopez. When you marry someone, you believe you know them. Until you don't. You build a life together, wake up next to them every morning, share meals, secrets, dreams. You trust them. And that trust? It becomes the foundation of everything. At least, that's what I thought. I thought we had something real. Solid. I thought we'd already faced our storm, weathered it, survived it. She swore it was over. Said she was sorry. Told me she had cut him off, that he meant nothing. And like a fool, I believed her. 6 months. 6 long months. I convinced myself we were healing. I convinced myself she was healing. I watched her smile at me, hold my hand, kiss me like we were whole again. But last night, I picked up her phone. I wasn't expecting to find anything. I wasn't searching for ghosts. I wasn't trying to dig up the past. But the past, it was still there. Hiding in plain sight. An unread message. A number I didn't recognize. A conversation she never should have had. My chest tightened. My vision blurred. And in that moment, I knew, my wife had betrayed me again. And this time, I wasn't going to be the fool. The following story is based on real-life events and explores the emotional, psychological, and relational impact of infidelity. The characters and events depicted are intended for storytelling and discussion purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. This story is meant to be a reflection on trust, betrayal, and the choices we make in the face of heartbreak. If you have experienced infidelity or relationship challenges, consider seeking professional guidance and support. I was a devoted husband. Until my wife made me question everything. You never really think it'll happen to you. You hear about it in passing, see it play out in movies, listen to a friend talk about how their world came crashing down when they found out their partner had been unfaithful. And each time, you think to yourself, that could never be me. That was exactly what I thought. I believed in loyalty. In commitment. In marriage. I wasn't naive, I knew relationships took work. But I also knew that trust was something you built and nurtured, something sacred. I had spent the last 6 years of my life devoted to my wife, Briella. 6 years of loving her, of choosing her, of waking up every single morning and believing that she was my partner in this life. And for the longest time, I thought she felt the same way about me. I wasn't a perfect husband, but I was present. I worked hard to give us a good life. I made time for her, I listened, I showed up. Every morning, before she even got out of bed, I made her coffee just the way she liked it, 2 sugars, a dash of cream. I knew her schedule by heart, which days she had early meetings, which days she needed an extra push to get out of bed. We had our little routines, our inside jokes, our late-night conversations that made me feel like we were still just 2 kids in love. For years, I believed we were happy. And then, Frankie Beltran happened. The woman I married was not the same woman who betrayed me. I met Briella on a September evening, 6 years ago. She was breathtaking. The kind of woman who didn't just walk into a room, she owned it. She was sharp, confident, the type of person who could talk her way into or out of anything. I was drawn to her. Instantly. I remember the moment I knew I wanted to spend my life with her. We were on a weekend trip, standing on a balcony overlooking the mountains. She had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring off into the horizon like she was meant to be there. And without even thinking, I whispered, "Let's do this forever." She turned to me, smiled, and said, "Forever sounds perfect." That moment stayed with me. That promise. I held on to it, even when things started to change. Even when the late nights at work became more frequent. Even when she started dressing up a little more, paying extra attention to her hair, her makeup, her phone. I brushed it off. Told myself I was overthinking. That this was just a phase, that marriage goes through ups and downs. Until one night. I picked up her phone and found the messages. Frankie Beltran, the man who should have never been a part of my marriage. I never met him. Never shook his hand. But I knew who he was. Frankie Beltran. He was a coworker at Briella's job. Persistent. Charming in a way that wasn't flattering, it was calculated. The kind of guy who saw a married woman as a challenge, not a boundary. At first, she swore it was nothing. Just harmless conversation. That he had a habit of flirting, but she didn't take it seriously. But the texts I found? They weren't harmless. They weren't just work talk. They were private. Intimate. It wasn't physical, not yet. But she was giving him something she wasn't giving me. And that was enough to break me. I confronted her. She cried. Told me she was lonely, that it was stupid, that she never meant for it to happen. She swore it was over, deleted his number, promised she'd never speak to him again. And like a fool, I forgave her. Because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You fight for them. You choose to believe in them. You convince yourself that love is worth the risk, even when your gut is telling you otherwise. I thought we had moved past it. But last night, I realized, some wounds don't heal. Some betrayals don't just end. Because last night, I found the messages. Again. She lied. Again. And this time, I wasn't going to be the fool. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't trying to dig up old wounds. But I picked up her phone, and there it was. An unread message. A number that wasn't saved in her contacts. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. That maybe it was someone else, a friend, a coworker. But then I read the messages. They weren't explicit. They weren't even romantic. But they were enough. She asked him how work was. Told him about our vacation. It was casual. Polite. Innocent, even. But it wasn't supposed to be happening. She wasn't supposed to be talking to him. She had promised me she wouldn't. And in that moment, I realized the worst part of it all. Maybe Frankie wasn't the problem. Maybe it wasn't just him who refused to let go. Maybe, she didn't want to. You think love can withstand anything. But love isn't just about the good days, the happy moments, the laughter and promises. Love is tested in the moments when trust is shattered. And sometimes, love fails. Gianna Rivers, the sister who saw more than she should have. If you asked me 5 years ago, I would have told you that Gianna Rivers was just my sister-in-law. Nothing more, nothing less. But life has a way of blurring lines, of twisting relationships into something more complex than they were ever meant to be. Gianna is Briella's younger sister, 3 years apart, but sometimes, it felt like there was an entire lifetime between them. They loved each other. Of course, they did. But beneath that love, there was always something unspoken. A rivalry that neither of them would admit existed but was impossible to ignore. Briella was the golden child, the one who excelled, the one who had the perfect life. The successful husband. The beautiful home. The marriage that, from the outside, looked unshakable. And then there was Gianna. She was different. Wilder. Always living on the edge, always running from something, bad relationships, bad decisions, bad timing. I liked her. I always had. Not in the way you're probably thinking, but in the way that you admire someone for being unapologetically themselves. And what Briella never realized, was how much Gianna and I talked. Not about her. Not at first. It started as small things, random late-night calls, check-ins, casual conversations about life. She would vent about her latest heartbreak, and I would listen, offering advice the best I could. Somewhere along the way, I became someone she confided in. And now, looking back, I wonder if that was the first mistake. Because in the moments when my marriage started to crack, Gianna was there. Watching. Listening. And maybe, just maybe, waiting. Before everything fell apart, we were happy. I think back to the beginning, to the days when life was simple. Before the doubts. Before the betrayal. Before I learned that love is not just about what you give, but about what the other person chooses to keep for themselves. Our wedding day was perfect. I still remember the way Briella looked when she walked down the aisle, this vision of white, her eyes locked onto mine, a smile playing at her lips like she was walking into the future she had always dreamed of. I meant every word of my vows. Every single one. I promised to be faithful. To be her partner in all things. To love her without conditions, without fear, without question. And at the time, I believed she meant hers too. The first few years of our marriage were good. Better than good. They were the kind of years you wish you could bottle up and keep forever. We traveled. We laughed. We stayed up late talking about our dreams, about the life we wanted to build together. I remember one night in particular. We were lying on the floor of our first apartment, staring at the ceiling like two kids who had the whole world ahead of them. "Where do you see us in 10 years?" she had asked. I turned my head, looking at her, memorizing the way the moonlight traced the curve of her face. "Still here," I had said. "Still us." She smiled. Leaned in. Kissed me like she believed it. Like she knew it. But love is funny that way. You can make all the promises in the world, but if someone stops choosing you, those promises mean nothing. Somewhere along the way, Briella stopped choosing me. And I never even saw it happening. When everything started to change. It didn't happen overnight. That's the part that still haunts me. It wasn't like I woke up one morning and realized my wife was slipping away. No. It was slower than that. More painful than that. A gradual shift. One moment, we were laughing over dinner. The next, she was checking her phone a little too often. One moment, we were planning our next vacation. The next, she was working late, more than usual. She started dressing differently. More makeup. Tighter dresses. At first, I thought she was just going through a phase. Maybe she wanted to feel attractive again, maybe she was just putting in more effort for herself. I wanted to believe that. But deep down, I knew better. I knew it the first time I caught her smiling at her phone, and when I asked what was so funny, she just shrugged. I knew it the first time she kissed me goodnight and I could feel the distance between us, even though we were inches apart. I knew it before I ever saw the messages. Before I ever learned the name Frankie Beltran. People always say that when something is wrong in your marriage, you just know. I did. I just didn't want to admit it. Because once you say it out loud, once you acknowledge the crack in the foundation, you have to face the fact that the life you thought was unbreakable might already be falling apart. If I had known then what I know now, would I have done anything differently? Would I have fought harder? Or would I have just walked away before the damage was too deep to repair? The shift was subtle. At first. It's funny how, when you look back, the signs are always there. Maybe not at first. Maybe they're buried under routine, under trust, under the simple belief that the person lying next to you every night would never do anything to break you. But once you know the truth, once everything has been shattered and you're left picking up the pieces, you see it. You see everything. And I did too. I just didn't want to admit it. Because once you admit something is wrong, you have to decide what you're going to do about it. And I wasn't ready for that. She wasn't the same woman anymore. The first time I noticed it, I brushed it off. It was a small thing, just a moment that, at the time, didn't seem like much. We were sitting on the couch, watching some random TV show that neither of us was really paying attention to. I looked over at her, just taking her in. The curve of her jawline, the way her lips pursed slightly when she was deep in thought. I leaned in and kissed her temple. It was nothing out of the ordinary, just a habit, a small show of affection. But instead of smiling, instead of leaning into me like she always did, she stiffened. Pulled away. Not much. Just a fraction of an inch. Just enough for me to notice. It was quick, so quick that if I had blinked I would have missed it. She turned to me and forced a small smile. "Sorry, babe. Just distracted." I nodded. Pretended it didn't bother me. But something inside of me twisted. Then came the late nights. The new late nights. Briella had always worked hard, always been dedicated to her job. But this was different. She started staying later than usual, coming home tired, distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. And the phone? It became a permanent fixture in her hand. Before, she would leave it on the kitchen counter without a second thought. Now? It was always with her. In her pocket, in her hand, screen tilted just enough so I couldn't see. At first, I ignored it. Told myself I was being paranoid. But then there were the smiles. Not at me. At the phone. Little, secretive smiles, followed by a quick swipe, a response typed out faster than I could blink, and then the guilt. Because that's the thing. I saw it in her eyes. Every time she laughed a little too hard at something on her screen. Every time I walked into the room and she hurried to lock her phone, placing it face down like she didn't want me to see. There was guilt. Not much. Just a flicker. A flash. But it was there. And I was a fool for pretending it wasn't. The anxiety, the distance, the lies in her eyes. Have you ever watched someone slip away from you in real time? It's not like the movies. There's no dramatic moment where you know it's over. No screaming match. No slamming doors. It's quiet. Subtle. A slow unraveling. At first, it's the small things, things that don't seem like much, things you tell yourself don't matter. She stops holding your hand when you walk together. She stops kissing you goodbye before she leaves for work. She starts getting dressed in the bathroom instead of in front of you. You tell yourself you're overreacting. You tell yourself that maybe you're the problem, that maybe you've done something to make her pull away. But then you start noticing the way she looks at you. Like she's guilty. Like she's hiding something. Like she's already 1 foot out the door, but she doesn't have the courage to tell you yet. She wasn't just distracted. She was somewhere else. There was one night I'll never forget. We were in bed, side by side, the room dimly lit by the glow of her phone. She thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I kept my breathing steady, eyes half-lidded, watching her out of the corner of my vision. She was staring at her screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Her lips parted slightly, a soft, breathy laugh escaping before she quickly covered her mouth, like she hadn't meant to let it slip. And then, the hesitation. The shift in her posture. The slow exhale, the quick glance in my direction, as if making sure I wasn't watching. She turned onto her side, phone pressed against her chest, the light no longer visible. Then she exhaled again, deeper this time. Like she had felt something. Like she had just given away a piece of herself that she could never take back. I don't know if she felt guilty that night. I don't know if she regretted whatever conversation she was having. But I do know one thing. She wasn't texting a friend. She wasn't answering work emails. She wasn't looking at something innocent. She was somewhere else. With someone else. And she thought I didn't notice. But I did. It's a strange thing, realizing that the person you love is slipping away from you. It's even stranger knowing that, no matter how hard you hold on, they've already let go. The trust was supposed to be rebuilt. But was it? Forgiveness is a strange thing. They tell you it's a choice. That you have to let go, that you have to move forward. That if you want to fix what's broken, you can't keep looking back. And I tried. God knows, I tried. After Briella's emotional affair, I did everything I was supposed to do. She quit her job. She cut contact with Frankie. She gave me access to her phone, her computer, her social media. She answered every question, reassured me over and over again that it had been a mistake. That it had been nothing. That she never loved him. And for a while, I let myself believe it. For months, things felt normal again. We laughed. We shared meals. We even made love again. I told myself we had gotten through it. That the worst was behind us. That our marriage, the thing I had fought so damn hard for, was finally healing. And maybe it was. But the thing about trust is, once it's broken, it never quite fits back the same way. It had been months since I last checked her phone. At first, I did it constantly. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Because every time she picked up her phone, a voice in my head whispered, "What if?" Every time she got a notification, I had to fight the urge to grab it from her hands. But over time, the need faded. She was trying. She was making an effort. She was home every night, looking me in the eyes, telling me she loved me. And I wanted to be the man who trusted his wife again. So I stopped checking. I let myself breathe. And for a while, things were good. Until one night. Until that night. The whisper in my mind, "Are you sure?" It wasn't anything specific that triggered it. No big fight, no glaring red flag. It was just a feeling. A quiet, nagging voice in the back of my mind. It came out of nowhere. We had been sitting on the couch, her legs draped over mine, the soft glow of the TV flickering across her face. She looked peaceful. Happy. And for the first time in months, I looked at her and thought, maybe we're okay. But then she got up to grab some water, leaving her phone face down on the coffee table. And just like that, the voice was back. Louder this time. "Are you sure?" I stared at her phone. I wasn't planning to check it. I didn't want to check it. But my hands were already moving before my brain could stop them. I reached for it. Turned it over. And saw the notification. The messages that changed everything. My stomach dropped. It was an unknown number. Not saved in her contacts. Just a single line, sitting there on the lock screen like it was waiting for me. "Miss talking to you." I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands tightened around the phone. And for a split second, I told myself maybe, I was overreacting. Maybe it was a wrong number. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it wasn't him. But then, against my better judgment, I unlocked the phone. And there it was. The conversation. A dozen messages, back and forth. Nothing overly affectionate. Nothing technically inappropriate. But enough. Enough to tell me everything I needed to know. "Briella, hey. How's work? Do they miss me over there?" Unknown number, "Not as much as I do." "Briella, lol stop. Anyway, I just got back from our trip. We went to the mountains, it was so peaceful." Unknown number, "Wish I could have been there with you." My vision blurred. My hands shook. And in that moment, I knew. I knew exactly who she was talking to. Frankie. Again. She had promised me. She had sworn. She had looked me in the eyes and told me she would never speak to him again. And yet. Here he was. Not in our bed. Not in our home. But still here. Still between us. Still waiting in the shadows, just like he had always been. And the worst part? She had let him. They say the worst part of betrayal isn't the act itself. It's knowing that the person you trusted looked you in the eye, swore on everything you built together. And still chose to lie. There are moments in life that define you. Moments where, in an instant, everything changes. They don't come with warnings. They don't give you time to prepare. 1 second, you're standing on solid ground. The next, the earth crumbles beneath you. Finding the messages, the moment it all unraveled. It was late. The house was quiet, save for the sound of the clock ticking from across the room. Briella was in the kitchen, humming softly as she rinsed off her wine glass from dinner. And I was still sitting on the couch, staring at her phone in my hand. I hadn't meant to pick it up. But I had. I hadn't meant to unlock it. But I did. And then I saw it. A number I didn't recognize. Not saved in her contacts. Not marked with a name. Just sitting there in her messages, like it meant nothing. Like it was just another conversation. But it wasn't. Because I knew. I knew. And the moment I tapped on the thread, the words on the screen blurred before my eyes. The messages that told me everything. Briella, hey. How's work? Do they miss me over there? Unknown number, not as much as I do. My heart pounded. My hands curled into fists. I kept reading. Briella, LOL stop. Anyway, I just got back from our trip. We went to the mountains, it was so peaceful. Unknown number, wish I could have been there with you. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger. Not sadness. Something worse. Something that felt like a cold, hollow emptiness spreading through me, like the realization was settling into my bones, making a home there. Innocent words. But the wrong sender, they weren't love letters. They weren't filled with passion or confessions of desire. They weren't even explicitly romantic. But they didn't have to be. Because they were a betrayal all the same. It wasn't what she said. It was who she was saying it to. She knew exactly who she was talking to. There's something about the way we speak to people we care about. It's subtle. A choice of words. A familiarity. A certain rhythm to the conversation. You don't need context. You just know. And as I stared at that conversation, at the way she responded so effortlessly, so naturally, I knew. She hadn't been caught off guard. She hadn't asked, "Who is this?" She hadn't hesitated. She knew exactly who she was talking to. And the moment that realization hit me, something inside me broke. The weight of betrayal, what she didn't say was louder than what she did. She didn't tell him to stop. She didn't say, "Please don't message me anymore." She didn't block his number. Instead, she engaged. She welcomed the conversation. She played along. She made space for him where there should have been none. And that? That was enough to tell me everything I needed to know. They say betrayal doesn't always come in the form of grand gestures. Sometimes, it's in the small things, the quiet, hidden moments that seem insignificant, until you realize they were never meant for you to see. The moment it became unforgivable. She promised me. She swore. But there she was. Keeping the door open for him, even if just a crack. I sat there, staring at the screen, my fingers tightening around the phone as if I could squeeze the truth out of it. I read the words over and over again, hoping that maybe, I was misinterpreting them. That maybe there was some explanation that didn't lead to the conclusion I was already reaching. But no matter how many times I read those messages, they didn't change. And neither did the truth staring back at me. Briella hadn't walked away. Not really. She had told me it was over. She had looked me in the eye, wiped her tears, begged for forgiveness. She had told me she understood what she had done. That she would never hurt me like that again. And for a while, I had believed her. I had forced myself to believe her. Because the alternative, the idea that she could lie to my face, sleep beside me every night, and still keep him in her life, was too much to bear. But here it was. Proof that she had never truly let him go. The worst part? She never told him to stop. I scrolled through the conversation again, my heart pounding. Not once did she push him away. Not once did she tell him, "Don't text me anymore." Not once did she say, "I'm married. Leave me alone." No. She had let it happen. She had answered him like it was normal, like it was nothing. Like I wouldn't find out. And the worst part? She wasn't even trying to hide it. It wasn't saved under a fake name. It wasn't buried in some hidden app or deleted thread. She had gotten comfortable. She had gotten careless. She had assumed I would never check. That I had already moved on. That I trusted her again. She wasn't technically cheating. But she wasn't loyal either. Some people think cheating is black and white. That as long as there's no kissing, no touching, no late-night meetups in secret hotel rooms, it doesn't count. But those people have never had their heart broken by someone who didn't have to take their clothes off to betray them. Because betrayal? Betrayal starts long before two people find themselves tangled in bedsheets. It starts in words. It starts in choices. It starts in the decision to respond, to engage, to let someone back in when they were supposed to be locked out for good. Briella hadn't physically cheated. But she wasn't loyal either. Loyalty is shutting down temptation before it turns into something more. Loyalty is keeping your promises even when no one is watching. Loyalty is not leaving the door open, not even a crack, for someone you claimed was a mistake. But Briella? She had left the door wide open. And worse? She had invited him in. I love her. We have a life together. A home. A family. But how can I be with someone who won't let go of another man? I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling shakily. My heart wanted to make excuses. It wanted to believe that maybe, this wasn't as bad as it felt. Maybe she was just being polite. Maybe she didn't want to be rude. Maybe it really was nothing. But my gut knew better. My gut had always known better. And right now? It was screaming at me. Because if she truly respected me, if she truly loved me, she would have never responded. She would have never risked everything for nothing. But she had. And that meant something. I wanted to be the kind of man who forgave. I had already done it once. I had given her the benefit of the doubt. I had chosen to fight for her, for our marriage, for the life we had built together. And part of me wanted to do it again. To take a deep breath, close my eyes, pretend I hadn't seen anything. But how many times can you look past something before it becomes who you are? Before you stop being a man with standards and start becoming a man with excuses? Before you lose yourself in the process? The hardest question I had to ask myself. If I stay, what am I really staying for? The love? The memories? The idea of what we used to be? Or was I just afraid to admit the truth? That the woman I had married wasn't the same woman anymore? They say love is supposed to be unconditional. But should it be? Should love be strong enough to survive betrayal? Or should self-respect be stronger? Knowing the truth, but waiting to strike. There's something about knowing the truth before you confront someone. You see them differently. You watch them. How they smile. How they speak. How they move. And all the while, you're screaming inside, because you know. But they don't know that you know. And that changes everything. The morning after, watching a liar in real time. I didn't say anything that morning. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But instead, I watched her. I watched the way she moved around the house, humming softly as she poured her coffee. The same coffee I used to make for her every morning. She smiled at me, kissed my cheek, told me she loved me before heading off to work. And I stood there, staring at her, wondering how easily those words left her mouth. Wondering if they even meant anything at all anymore. Because how do you tell someone you love them when you're still holding on to someone else? The longest day of my life, the weight of waiting. I spent the whole day thinking. Thinking about what I was going to say. Thinking about how I was going to say it. Thinking about whether I even wanted to hear her excuses. Because that's what they were going to be, excuses. I knew how this conversation would go before it even started. She would deny. She would downplay. She would shift the blame. And maybe, she would cry. But not because she was sorry. No. She would cry because she got caught. Because in the end, some people don't regret their actions. They only regret being exposed. The night that changed everything. I waited. I waited until she was asleep. Until the house was silent, the lights dim, the air thick with the kind of quiet that only exists before a storm. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the rage simmering beneath my skin. But more than anything, I felt empty. And I knew, in that moment, that once I spoke the words sitting on my tongue, there would be no going back. The confrontation, a question that shattered the illusion. Who were you texting? It was a simple question. A calm question. A question that should have been easy to answer. But the moment I said it, she stopped breathing. Her first mistake, the second of hesitation. For a second, she didn't move. She didn't open her eyes. She didn't even flinch. But I saw it. The way her fingers curled slightly into the sheets. The way her breath caught in her throat before she forced it out, steady and controlled. The way she was already trying to come up with a lie before she even faced me. She opens her eyes, and the lies begin. Slowly, she turned over, blinking at me, feigning confusion. Like she didn't know what I was talking about. Like she hadn't been caught red-handed just hours ago. And then, with a sleepy voice, she spoke. No one. Just a friend. I stared at her. A friend. Just a friend. Funny. That's exactly what she called him last time. Pressing forward, forcing the truth out of her. You mean Frankie? Her body stiffened. I saw it. The way her shoulders tensed, the way her lips parted, the way her breathing grew just a little too careful. And in that moment, she knew. She knew she had messed up. But instead of telling the truth, instead of admitting to what she had done, she did what she always did best. She lied. The excuses begin, the cycle repeats. It was nothing. Just catching up. I didn't even think it mattered. She said the words so smoothly, so effortlessly, that for a split second, I almost believed her. Almost. But I wasn't the same man I was 6 months ago. I wasn't desperate for reassurance anymore. I wasn't blind to the manipulation. And I wasn't going to let her gaslight me into doubting what I had seen with my own eyes. They say the worst kind of liar is the one who lies even when they're already caught. Because at that point, it's not just dishonesty. It's a choice. A choice to betray you all over again. The moment I finally let go. There is something about realizing that the person you love has already chosen to betray you. It's not like being stabbed all at once. No, betrayal is slower than that. It's a dull blade pressing against your skin, slicing inch by inch, deeper and deeper, until one day, you look down and realize you're bleeding out. And the worst part is, they don't even notice. Or maybe, they just don't care. I watched her. I watched as she fumbled for words, as she tried to salvage what little trust was left between us. She had been caught. There was no way out this time. No justifications, no half-truths, no carefully crafted lies that could save her now. I saw it in her eyes. For the first time, I saw fear. Not fear of me. Fear of losing what she never thought she would. Fear of realizing that this time, her words wouldn't be enough. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not this time. Because she had months to tell me. But she didn't. The excuses mean nothing now. Her lips trembled. Her hands curled into the sheets, gripping them as if she could hold on to something solid, something real. But reality had already slipped through her fingers. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke, and I knew what was coming before she even said it. I didn't want to lose you. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was pathetic. Because it was too late. Because she had already lost me. Tears streamed down her face. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, and for a split second, I wondered if she even understood what she was crying for. Was it for me? For us? For what we had built together? Or was it just for herself? For the guilt she didn't want to carry? For the consequences she never thought she'd have to face? Because there's a difference between regret and remorse. Regret is wishing you never got caught. Remorse is wishing you had never done it in the first place. And Briella? She had regret written all over her face. But remorse? I wasn't sure she even knew what that felt like. The moment I let go, something inside me cracked. Not in anger. Not in rage. In finality. I had spent so long trying to hold this marriage together, convincing myself that love was enough. But love is a two-way street. And when one person stops choosing you, when they start making decisions that hurt you over and over again, that's when you realize love alone will never be enough. I looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't see my wife. I saw a stranger. A stranger who had broken me in ways I never thought possible. And now? Now, I was done breaking for her. Love is supposed to withstand storms. But no one ever tells you that sometimes. The person you're protecting your love from is the very person setting fire to everything you built. And at some point, you have to decide. Do you keep standing in the flames? Or do you finally walk away? Dallas feels numb, the void left behind. You'd think after a night like that, I would have left. That I would have grabbed my keys, walked out the door, and never looked back. But I didn't. I stayed. Not because I forgave her. Not because I wanted to fix things. But because sometimes, leaving isn't as simple as walking away. Sometimes, you stay because you don't know what else to do. Because the life you built, the routines, the habits, the history, it holds you in place. Even when you know you don't belong there anymore. So I stayed. But inside? I was already gone. The shift she couldn't ignore. Briella noticed the shift almost immediately. She wasn't stupid. She could feel the distance. She could see it in the way I moved around the house, like a ghost, like a man going through the motions of a life he no longer recognized. She asked me what was wrong. I told her nothing. And that was the cruelest part. Not the anger. Not the accusations. Nothing. Because nothing is worse than hate. Hate is still an emotion. Nothing means you don't care anymore. And I think, deep down, she knew that was worse than if I had screamed at her. She reached for me one night, tried to touch me, tried to kiss me, tried to pretend that we could just go back to normal. I let her touch me. But I didn't touch her back. And I could feel her hands tremble against my skin as she pulled away. Because she knew. She had already lost me. Enter Gianna Rivers, the sister who always listened. There was only one person who noticed the change in me before Briella did. Gianna. Maybe it was because she had always paid more attention. Maybe it was because she had always understood me in ways Briella never did. Or maybe it was because part of her had always been waiting for this moment. She called me the next day, out of the blue. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks, maybe months. Not really. Not since I had convinced myself that my marriage was fine. That I was fine. But now? Now she heard something in my voice that told her I wasn't. She asked me if I wanted to talk. And for the first time in a long time, I said yes. The conversations that felt too easy. It started small. A phone call here and there. Checking in. Making sure I was okay. She never pried, never pushed me to say more than I was ready to. She just listened. And that was something I hadn't felt in a long time. Because Briella never listened. She heard me, but she never listened. With Gianna, it was different. She didn't try to fix things. She didn't try to make excuses for Briella. She just let me exist. And that? That was more comforting than anything else. Late nights, shared wine, and the slippery slope. It didn't take long before phone calls turned into late-night visits. I told myself it was innocent. And maybe it was. At first. She would come over after work, a bottle of wine in hand, an easy smile on her lips that somehow made me forget, just for a little while, that my entire life was unraveling. We would sit on the back porch, watching the sky darken, talking about anything and everything, except Briella. Because in those moments, Briella didn't exist. It was just us. And for the first time in months, I felt something other than anger. Other than numbness. And I didn't know if that was better, or worse. The first touch that meant something more. It happened without me even realizing it. A small touch. Her hand on my arm as she laughed at something I said. Her fingers brushing against mine as she reached for her glass. Her knee pressing lightly against mine beneath the table. Innocent. Subtle. But somehow, intimate. I should have pulled away. I should have reminded myself that this was Briella's sister. That no matter what Briella had done to me, no matter how much she had hurt me, this wasn't the answer. But I didn't pull away. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt wanted. I felt seen. And wasn't that exactly what Briella had taken from me? The justification that wasn't justified. I told myself it wasn't wrong. Not really. I hadn't crossed a line. I hadn't done what Briella did. But wasn't this how it started for her? Wasn't this exactly how she had justified it in the beginning? It's just talking. It's just a friend. It's nothing. But the truth was, nothing had started feeling like everything. And the scariest part? I didn't want to stop. Because if Briella could betray me so easily, why should I be the only one left standing in the ruins? They say 2 wrongs don't make a right. But when you've been wronged enough times, it's hard to care about being right. And that's how it starts. That's how you become the thing you swore you'd never be. And by the time you realize it, you're already too far gone. The betrayal comes full circle, the night that changed everything. There's always a moment. A single moment where everything shifts. Where a decision is made, not out loud, not consciously, but somewhere deep beneath the surface. And once you cross that invisible line, there's no going back. I told myself I wasn't like Briella. That I would never do what she did. That no matter how much she had hurt me, I would be the better person. But that's the thing about pain. It doesn't just sit there. It festers. It changes you. And on that night, I let it. It had been another long night. Another bottle of wine. Another conversation that lasted too late into the evening. Gianna had been venting about her own relationships, how she always seemed to fall for the wrong men, how she envied what Briella and I used to have. I should have corrected her. Told her that Briella and I had nothing worth envying anymore. But instead, I just nodded, staring at my glass, swirling the deep red liquid like it held some kind of answer. It didn't. Neither did I. When I finally looked up, Gianna was watching me. Not in the way she usually did. There was something different in her eyes. Something heavier. Something dangerous. And before I could stop myself, I asked the question that had been lingering in the back of my mind for weeks. Why do you put up with men who don't see your worth? She smiled, but it was sad. Because the one man who ever did, was never mine to have. Her words should have hit me like a warning shot. Should have sobered me up instantly. Instead, they felt like permission. Gianna comforts me, and I let her. She reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. Her fingers were soft, warm, hesitant, like she was waiting for me to pull away. I didn't. Because in that moment, the weight of everything I had been carrying, the betrayal, the anger, the exhaustion of trying to hold together something that had already fallen apart. It all disappeared. And for the first time in months, I felt something other than pain. I felt wanted. Needed. Like I wasn't just a broken man picking up the pieces of someone else's mistake. Gianna saw me. Not as Briella's husband. Not as a man to be pitied. She saw me. And God help me. I wanted to be seen. She moved first. Or maybe I did. I don't remember anymore. All I know is that suddenly, she was closer. Her breath was warm against my skin. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes searching mine, looking for something, anything, that told her to stop. I should have said no. I should have pulled away. But I didn't. Because I didn't want to. Because, in that moment, I wasn't thinking about Briella. I wasn't thinking about marriage or loyalty or the fact that this was the one thing I swore I would never do. I was thinking about the fact that I was tired. Tired of hurting. Tired of being the only one who had to suffer. Tired of pretending like I was still the same man I had been before Briella ripped my heart apart. Maybe I wanted revenge. Maybe I just wanted to feel something again. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. Because by the time I realized what was happening, Gianna's lips were on mine. And I kissed her back. The betrayal I never thought I'd commit. It was slow at first. Soft. Hesitant. Like we both knew this was wrong but were too far gone to stop. Then, something changed. The hesitation melted away. The softness turned into something more desperate, more consuming. Fingertips traced over skin. Breath hitched. Hands tangled in hair. And somewhere, deep in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered. This is exactly how it started for Briella. And that's when it hit me. I had become her. I had become the thing I hated. And the worst part? I didn't even regret it. When it was over, we didn't speak. We just lay there, side by side, staring at the ceiling like two people who knew they had just crossed a line they could never uncross. Gianna turned to me, her fingers brushing lightly against my arm. "Are you okay?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't know the answer. Because in that moment, everything felt numb. Because somewhere, deep in my gut, I knew that this wasn't just about Briella anymore. This was about me. About what I had allowed myself to become. About how easy it was to justify something when you had been hurt enough times. Because pain makes you reckless. Pain makes you selfish. Pain makes you do things you swore you'd never do. And now? Now I was just another man with a secret. Just another betrayal waiting to be discovered. And when it happened, would I have any right to beg for forgiveness? Or had I already damned myself? They say revenge feels good. That getting even will somehow make the pain hurt less. But standing in the wreckage of my own choices, I realized something. Revenge doesn't heal you. It just makes you the villain in someone else's story. And now? I wasn't sure if I was ready to live with that. People like to believe that every story has a clean ending. That there's always a lesson. That there's always a moment of redemption. But life isn't like that. Sometimes, you just live with the choices you make. The good ones. The bad ones. The ones that change you forever. And this? This was one of those choices. The truth I had to face. I could have blamed Briella forever. I could have spent my life pointing at her mistakes, at the way she betrayed me first, at how she destroyed something I thought was unbreakable. But at some point, you have to stop looking at other people. You have to look at yourself. Because in the end, I wasn't just a man who had been betrayed. I was a man who made choices. And the hardest truth I had to face? I had let the pain consume me. I had let the betrayal turn me into something I never wanted to be. I had been so desperate to hurt her back that I forgot the most important thing. I forgot who I was before any of this happened. And if I wanted to heal, I had to find that man again. Walking away, the first step toward healing. So I made a decision. Not out of anger. Not out of spite. But because I finally understood. Love isn't meant to be a war. Marriage isn't supposed to feel like survival. And I refused to spend another day drowning in something that had already burned to the ground. So I walked away. Not just from Briella. Not just from the past. But from the version of myself that had forgotten how to move forward. Finding myself again. Healing doesn't happen overnight. There's no quick fix. No magic moment where everything just stops hurting. But there is a choice. To wake up every morning and decide that the past doesn't define you. To let go of the bitterness before it becomes a part of you. To stop letting someone else's betrayal turn you into something you're not. I'm still learning. Still figuring out who I am after everything I've lost. But for the first time in a long time, I'm not looking back. I'm not searching for revenge. I'm not drowning in the weight of what could have been. I'm just living. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. People think that when a marriage ends, it's because of one moment. One mistake. One betrayal. But the truth is, it's never just one thing. It's 1,000 little choices. 1,000 little cracks that slowly, quietly break something that was once whole. And when you finally step back and look at it, you realize it was over long before you admitted it. I spent too long trying to fight for something that was already lost. Too long trying to make sense of a love that had already slipped through my fingers. And now? Now I choose myself. So tell me. If you were me, would you have done the same? Or would you still be fighting for something that was never meant to be saved?